history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her claims have been born of earnest struggle. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will.
These are the words of Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest minds in American history. Born into slavery in the early 1800s, Douglass would live to see the Civil War, emancipation, black men getting the right to vote with the 15th Amendment, and the beginning of the terrors and humiliations of Jim Crow. And through all of that, he kept coming back to one thing, a sacred right he believed was at the heart of American democracy: voting.
In this final episode of our series, Misrepresentative Democracy, we're tackling the question that both haunted and drove Douglass his entire life. Is our democracy set up to include everyone? And if not, can it ever be?
We all know American democracy didn't start out that way. Initially, only land-owning white men could vote. So the founding principle of representation for all was really just representation for a few.
And sure, we've made progress. People of all races and genders can now vote. But running parallel to that progress is another reality. At every step of the way, as more people have gotten the vote, more barriers have been put in their way to keep them from voting.
Will you repeat the mistakes of your fathers who sinned ignorantly? Will the country be peaceful, united, and happy? Or troubled, divided, and miserable?
Frederick Douglass dreamed of a country that lived up to the ideals of its founding fathers, where all people could vote, universal suffrage. And he did everything in his power to make that dream a reality. In the face of suffering, he hoped. In the face of setbacks, he hoped. In the face of violence, he hoped. And in the face of suppression, Frederick Douglass hoped.
In a democracy, when citizens can't vote, we get a bastardized nation. We get policies that reflect the will of the few and not of the majority. We get institutions created that are designed to empower and enrich the few.
This is Carol Anderson, author of One Person, No Vote.
All right, hold on a second. I gotta scroll to the next section because we're not going to listen to this entire hour-long podcast. So here we go. We're going to start it back up at 9:50. So let's get there. How we doing, everybody? Oh, it's so hard to get to that one spot. Okay, let's try this. There we go. All right.
When the sun goes down, I'll be so glad when the sun goes down. When the sun goes down,
I was seldom whipped by my old master, and suffered little from anything else than hunger and cold. I was kept almost naked, no shoes, no stockings, no jacket, no trousers. Nothing on but a coarse towel linen shirt reaching only to my knees. I had no bed. I must have perished with cold, but that the coldest nights, I used to steal a bag which was used for carrying corn to the mill. I would crawl into this bag and there sleep on the cold, damp clay floor, with my head in and feet out. My feet been so cracked with the frost that the pen with which I am writing might be laid in the gashes.
He is shipped to Baltimore, up the Chesapeake, when he's 7 years old, to be the playmate of his owner's brother's son.
We sailed out of Miles River for Baltimore on a Saturday morning. I remember only the day of the week, for at that time I had no knowledge of the days of the month, nor the months of the year. On setting sail, I walked aft and gave Colonel Lloyd's plantation what I hoped would be the last look.
The best luck or fate in Douglas's early life was going to Baltimore because it opened to him a new vision on the world. Baltimore was a very large seaport then, and a big shipbuilding center. Sophia Hall takes him in because he's supposed to be the playmate of their son. She teaches him his letters, the alphabet, and he takes to reading in an insatiable way. Hewald, her husband, stopped by one day and said, "You can't teach that kid anymore." In fact, Douglas describes it using the N-word.
Hey, I just want to say that this podcast is going to say the actual N-word. So don't be alarmed. The reason it's doing that is to kind of exemplify how painful and derogatory the word is in the context it was created in. Anyway, just so you know, you're going to hear the actual N-word. Here we go.
A nigger should know nothing but to obey his master,
You must stop teaching him.
to do as he is told to do. Learning would spoil the best nigger in the world.
And Douglas says later, that was the first anti-slavery speech I ever heard. Because if this is such a precious skill, and they don't want me to have it, then I must really want to get. I need this. This is maybe the way out of this.
All right. Thank you for listening to our second segment. So basically what happened is he was learning how to read, and his enslaver was like, whoa, we can't let him learn how to read. That's going to ruin him. And he was like, oh, maybe I'm not beneath these people. Like maybe they're pushing me here. And then he was devoted to learning how to read. All right. I'm seeing where I need to continue. Is that the end? Nope. Okay. Here we go. Go to 24 minutes. Ba, ba, bow. All right. Here we go.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting
hold
in
on.
respect for the fathers of this republic. I cannot contemplate their great deed night with you to honor their memory.
All right, here we go. This is where the green transcript
From the
continues.
very moment he gets on a platform as a speaker, as early as 1841, and then endlessly across the North as the itinerant abolitionist orator in the 1840s into the 1850s, Douglas was a firm, fierce believer in what the 19th century loved to call the natural rights tradition. And what we generally mean by that is that tradition of inalienable rights, rights that are either from God or from nature. Douglas once referred to the first principles of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, the four first principles: liberty, equality, popular sovereignty, meaning governments exist by the consent of the governed, and the last was the right of revolution. Exactly what he meant by equality, has always been open to debate. But Douglas loved those principles, loved those creeds. He loved the Declaration of Independence in that sense. He didn't like the way it was practiced, but he loved the creed.
What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us.
He said natural rights are like the air you breathe. They belong to no one group, no one person, no one country. They belong to everybody. And the right to vote to Douglass in something called a republic, if it could ever live up to those creeds, was the most sacred right of all. He saw it not just as a kind of human right to participate in one's political system, but he saw it as a power by which people could protect themselves. That's a little hard sometimes in our world, 21st century, especially with young people, to convince them, your right to vote is a way to protect yourself. Douglass really believed that, and he said it 1,000 times over, that the right to vote for African Americans in particular, especially once they were liberated by the Civil War, was their greatest self-protection.
All persons held as slaves shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free.
The Civil War brings about overnight, in historical time, the liberation of 4 million people. Well, that took enormous blood and sacrifice, of course.
Sorry, we're done. Thanks so much for listening. I'm going to try to turn off my recording. See, that didn't work. Okay.